In the early days of the Second World War, Japan stood unchallenged across the Pacific. From China's coast to the jungles of Burma, from the Philippines to the scattered islands of the South Pacific, the rising sun flew proudly over conquered lands. Japanese commanders believed their empire was untouchable, protected by the vastness of the Pacific Ocean. They thought no enemy could ever strike their homeland. But far across that same ocean, deep within the American heartland, something extraordinary was taking shape. A machine that would soon bring fire to the skies of Japan. The Japanese military laughed at the rumors. They believed no aircraft could fly from distant islands all the way to Japan, deliver a heavy bomb load, and return. It was beyond imagination. Yet, in secret, the Americans were building the weapon that would change the course of the Pacific War, the Boeing B-29 Superfortress. It began with an impossible challenge. In 1939, even before America entered the war, the Army Air Corps asked Boeing to design a bomber that could fly over 5,000 miles at high speed, carrying an enormous payload of bombs. Engineers said it couldn't be done, but Boeing accepted the challenge. From the factories of Wichita and Seattle, thousands of workers toiled day and night. The result was the most advanced bomber the world had ever seen. It was huge, larger than anything before it, with 4 massive engines, remote-controlled gun turrets, and a pressurized cabin that allowed crews to fly higher than any Japanese fighter could reach. The project cost billions, more than even the atomic bomb program. When the prototype finally took flight in 1942, it looked like something from the future. But the road to success was paved with tragedy. Test flights ended in disaster, engines overheated, and entire planes were lost. Yet America pressed on, producing thousands of B-29s and training new crews for a mission that no one had ever attempted. When the fires died and the mushroom clouds faded, Japan was silent. The once mighty empire lay in ruins. Cities had vanished. The railways no longer ran. Millions were homeless, hungry, and broken. Across the scorched landscape, the outlines of streets and neighborhoods could still be seen. Shadows burned into the ground by the flash of the atomic bombs. In the weeks after surrender, American planes no longer came as enemies but as lifelines. The same B-29s that had rained destruction now dropped food, medicine, and supplies to the starving population. For the first time, Japanese civilians saw these giant bombers not as harbingers of death, but as symbols of a fragile peace. The same engines that once echoed with terror now brought survival. On the ground, American occupation forces arrived to rebuild what the war had destroyed. General Douglas MacArthur oversaw the reconstruction of a new Japan, one without an emperor's divine rule, one that would rise again from ashes as a democracy. The Japanese people faced the devastation with quiet determination. They cleared the rubble, repaired roads, and began to rebuild their homes with their bare hands. The spirit of resilience that had once fueled an empire now drove their recovery. The B-29, meanwhile, became a legend. Many of the planes were scrapped or left abandoned on Pacific islands, their work complete. A few were preserved as relics, silent witnesses to the most destructive chapter in human history. Crews returned home, some celebrated as heroes, others haunted by what they had seen from the skies. Many never spoke of it again. Historians would debate for generations whether the atomic bombings were necessary. Some argued they saved millions of lives by ending the war swiftly. Others called them crimes against humanity. But no matter the view, one truth remained undeniable. The world had changed forever. The age of atomic warfare had begun. For Japan, the surrender was not only an end, but also a beginning. Within a few short decades, the nation rebuilt itself into an industrial powerhouse, rising from total ruin to become one of the most advanced economies in the world. The cities that had once burned now glowed with neon lights, symbols of peace and progress. Tokyo, once a sea of ashes, became a city of life once more. Yet for those who lived through it, the memories never faded. Survivors of the bombings, the hibakusha, carried the scars in their bodies and in their hearts. They told their stories to future generations, warning that humanity must never again unleash such weapons. As the Cold War dawned, new bombers took to the skies, faster and deadlier than the B-29. But none carried the same haunting legacy. The Superfortress had shown what industrial power and human ingenuity could achieve, and what horrors they could unleash. For the Japanese commanders who had once mocked the idea of an American bomber reaching their shores, the lesson was eternal. They had underestimated a nation's will, its industry, and its imagination. Their laughter had been silenced by fire, their pride buried beneath the ruins of Tokyo. And for the world, the B-29 marked the end of one era and the terrifying beginning of another. It was a machine that had won a war, but in doing so, revealed the price of victory. When the last surviving B-29 crews gathered decades later, their faces were lined with age and memory. They spoke softly of friends lost, of missions flown through flak and fire. Some still remembered the glow of burning cities below, the silence in their headphones after each bomb run, and the strange, heavy feeling that came when the engines went quiet at last. The B-29 Superfortress was more than a bomber. It was a symbol of power, of tragedy, and of the thin line between progress and destruction. It carried humanity's greatest hopes and darkest fears in its wings. And as the sun set over the Pacific once again, the echoes of those engines faded into history. Planned. One more secret, more terrible than any before. Deep in the Pacific, engineers and scientists were preparing a weapon that would end the war in a single instant. Soon, the B-29 would return to Japan again, not with firebombs, but with something far more powerful. Still, the early B-29 missions were far from perfect. Weather, mechanical failures, and inexperience plagued the crews. High-altitude precision bombing proved nearly useless. Strong jet streams scattered the bombs, and many missed their targets entirely. Months passed with little visible progress. Japan's factories continued to run, and morale in Tokyo remained strong. That's when a new American commander took over, General Curtis LeMay. He was ruthless, brilliant, and utterly determined to end the war. LeMay studied the reports and concluded that precision bombing wasn't working. Japan's cities weren't built like Germany's. They were made of wood and paper, dense and dry. To destroy the factories, he would destroy the cities themselves. LeMay's orders were shocking. The bombers would fly low at night, stripped of most of their guns to carry more bombs. And instead of high explosives, they would drop incendiaries. Bombs designed to burn everything they touched. On a quiet March night in 1945, the B-29 crews began to take off from the Mariana Islands. There were hundreds of them, their wings heavy with fuel and fire. Mechanics watched as they lifted into the dark sky, one after another, until the horizon itself seemed to shimmer from the exhaust flames. Their destination was Tokyo. Below them, the great city slept. Nearly 4 million people filled its neighborhoods, their homes built close together, their roofs and walls made of wood and paper. The first warning sirens wailed too late. When the bomb bay doors opened, thousands of small metal cylinders fell silently through the clouds. Each one burst open on impact, releasing rivers of burning gasoline. The fire spread faster than anyone could imagine. Flames leapt from house to house, street to street. The air turned into a furnace. Winds rose, swirling through the city, feeding the inferno until it became a storm of fire. Entire districts vanished in minutes. Families tried to flee, but the streets were already rivers of flame. The only hope was the water. Rivers, canals, ponds, yet even there, people found no safety. The heat boiled the water and smoke blotted out the stars. From the sky, the B-29 crews could see Tokyo consumed by fire. Even through their windows, they could feel the heat. Pilots described the city as a sea of flame, stretching to the horizon. The glow was visible hundreds of miles away. For 3 long hours, the bombing continued. When dawn came, Tokyo was gone. 16 square miles of the city had been completely destroyed. 100,000 people were dead, more than in Hiroshima or Nagasaki. It was the deadliest air raid in human history, The Japanese military could not comprehend what had happened. The reports arriving at headquarters were filled with disbelief. Entire wards of Tokyo had simply vanished. Communication lines were severed, and factories reduced to ashes. The once proud capital lay in ruins. And yet, the B-29s kept coming. Osaka, Kobe, Nagoya, city after city burned. The Americans no longer aimed for factories or airfields. They aimed for the cities themselves, to erase Japan's ability to fight. Each night, the sky over Japan turned red. Anti-aircraft fire grew weaker, fighters fewer, radar screens emptier. The empire that once conquered half the Pacific could no longer defend its own skies. Still, Japan refused to surrender. The emperor remained silent, and the generals vowed to fight to the last man. Even as the people starved and the cities burned, the army prepared for an American invasion that would never come. But the firebombing campaign had done more than destroy cities. It had proven that the B-29 was unlike any bomber in history. It could reach anywhere, carry more bombs, and deliver more destruction than anything that came before it. The Japanese commanders who once laughed at America's flying fortress now saw it as the symbol of their defeat. As Tokyo smoldered in ruins, a new mission for the B-29 was already being... By the summer of 1945, Japan was a nation on its knees. Its navy had been annihilated, its air force reduced to fragments, its cities turned to ash. Yet still, it refused to surrender. The military leaders clung to hope that if they could bleed the Americans in one final defense of the homeland, perhaps they could negotiate better terms. The people were told to fight with bamboo spears if they must. Entire villages trained to die for the emperor. But far away across the Pacific, the Americans were preparing a final blow, something far beyond fire and steel. Hidden deep within the desert of New Mexico, scientists had spent years working on a weapon that harnessed the power of the atom itself. Few knew what it truly was. Fewer still understood what it would do. But one thing was certain. When it was ready, the B-29 Superfortress would be the plane to deliver it. The aircraft chosen for the mission was unlike the others. It was silver and spotless, with the name Enola Gay painted on its nose. The crew, led by Colonel Paul Tibbets, trained for months under the highest secrecy. They learned new flight patterns, new bomb release procedures, and were told only that their mission could end the war. On the morning of August 6, 1945, the Enola Gay lifted off from Tinian Island carrying a single bomb, a weapon called Little Boy. It was a calm, clear morning over Japan. The people of Hiroshima were beginning their day. Workers headed to factories, children to school, and soldiers to their posts. Just after 8 a.m., air raid sirens sounded briefly as the B-29 appeared overhead, but soon went silent. A single plane was nothing unusual. The people resumed their routines. They did not know that in less than a minute, everything around them would cease to exist. At 8:15 a.m., the bomb bay doors opened. The crew released their payload and banked sharply away. The bomb drifted down silently for 43 seconds. Then, in an instant, the world changed. A blinding flash filled the sky, brighter than the sun. A fireball exploded in the heart of Hiroshima, vaporizing everything within hundreds of meters. A shockwave tore through the city, flattening buildings, hurling debris, and igniting fires that raged uncontrollably. Those who saw the light were blinded instantly. Those who stood near the blast simply vanished. The mushroom cloud rose over 60,000 feet into the sky. From miles away, people watched in stunned silence, unable to comprehend what had happened. Within minutes, Hiroshima was gone, a silent, smoldering ruin. Tens of thousands lay dead, and more would die in the days that followed from burns and radiation. When American command received word that the bomb had worked, there was no celebration, only silence. Even those who had built it could barely grasp the scale of its destruction. Yet Japan still refused to surrender. The military claimed Hiroshima was just another conventional air raid. They vowed to keep fighting. 3 days later, another B-29 took off, this one named Boxcar. Its target was Kokura, but heavy clouds forced the crew to divert. The new target, Nagasaki. The bomb it carried was different, a plutonium device known as Fat Man. At 11:02 a.m. on August 9th, the bomb fell. The explosion was even more powerful than Hiroshima's. The heart of Nagasaki was obliterated in seconds. Tens of thousands died instantly. The city burned, its valleys filled with smoke and ash. 2 cities destroyed in less than a week. 2 blinding flashes that ended an empire. In Tokyo, the government descended into chaos. Some generals still argued for resistance. They wanted to fight on, to defend the home islands no matter the cost. But Emperor Hirohito saw what his commanders refused to see. The war was lost. If it continued, Japan would cease to exist entirely. On August 15, 1945, the emperor spoke to his people for the first time in history. His voice, trembling but clear, was broadcast across the nation. He said Japan must endure the unendurable and accept surrender. For the first time, the rising sun bowed. The war that had engulfed the world for 6 years was over. Across the Pacific, B-29 crews stood on the airfields of the Mariana Islands, staring at the horizon. The planes that had once carried fire and destruction now sat silent. Some of the men felt pride, others guilt, and many a haunting emptiness that would never leave them. When Japan's surrender documents were signed aboard the battleship Missouri in Tokyo Bay, a formation of hundreds of B-29s flew overhead in perfect unison. The machines that had brought the empire to its knees now marked the peace they had forced. The Japanese commanders who once laughed at the idea of an American bomber reaching their homeland now watched their nation surrender beneath the shadow of those very wings. The laughter had long since faded. The age of the B-29 had ended the war and ushered the world into the nuclear age, as they cruised far above the range of defense guns. The first bombs fell on Yawata, a key industrial center. The damage was light, but the psychological shock was immense. Japan's commanders realized that their homeland was no longer beyond reach. The ocean barrier they trusted so deeply had been breached.